Well, it's my great privilege and honor to introduce our next speaker. President Felipe Calderón served as president of Mexico from 2006 to 2012. Under his administration, the Mexican economy registered stability and economic growth. He navigated the impact of the 2009 international economic crisis, boosted competitiveness in Mexico, and increased investment in infrastructure. Very important and sort of central to the conversation that we're going to have tonight, President Calderón was a longtime champion of the environment. He was the first Latin American leader to chair the G20 Leaders Summit, and he has long been committed to fighting climate change. He chaired the UN COP16 climate change conference, which marked a new era of cooperation and a long-term approach to addressing climate change. He was awarded the Statesman of the Year award by the World Economic Forum, named Champion of the Earth by the United Nations, and received the Teddy Roosevelt Award from the United States Congress for his leadership in environmental issues. The Global Legislators Organization for a Balanced Environment honored him with a Globe Award. He served as a member of the board of directors of the World Resource Institute and was president of the Environment and Sustainability Commission of the FTA. President Calderón is the honorary chairman of the Global Commission on the Economy and Climate, where he led the New Climate Economy Project, oriented to demonstrate that it is possible to have economic growth and tackle climate change at the same time. So please extend a warm EarthX and a warm Texas welcome to President Felipe Calderón.
Thank you. Good.
Thank you so much for being here.
Oh, it's a pleasure. Thank you for inviting me.
The New Economy Project. This week, EarthX, one of our big sort of focuses is how do we build economies that can support the planet. And I think there's this tension that runs through conversations about the environment, through the environmental movement, that there's a fundamental paradox. You know, the way that Western economies grow, it requires a mass consumption of energy, mass consumption of products, of consumer goods, and of course a huge, tremendous production of carbon, which is at the root of where the climate crisis is coming from. But that project researched into how can we turn this crisis and turn this growth into something of opportunity. Explain what that research was, how that project worked.
Well,
what
first,
some of the
let me tell you how the New Climate Economy Project started. Mm-hmm. So we get together a lot of leaders, Jens Stoltenberg, for instance, Prime Minister of Norway at that time, and after that, the Secretary General of NATO, by the way, business people like Chad Holliday, Chairman of Bank of America, afterwards Chairman of Shell Company. So a lot of quite interesting people, former President Lagos of Chile, etc. So we realized that the main obstacle to take action in terms of climate change and environmental responsibility is this idea, Peter, that taking action implies economic costs, that you need to sacrifice economic growth or poverty alleviation or job creation if you decide to be responsible. So we created a commission, Global Commissions on the Economy and Climate, and our goal was to demonstrate, and I believe we did it through our reports, that it's a false dilemma. You don't need to choose between economic growth and tackling climate change. Actually, the way to get sustainable growth in the future is being responsible. And we demonstrated also that with the right public policies, the right behavior, we can get less carbon emission, low carbon economy, but also economic growth, job creation, poverty alleviation. And let me be honest with you. We were looking for a new narrative. I believe, and I still believe, that sometimes the environmentalism is just tiring the people. So if you talk about the people, oh my God, the time is over, we're destroying the planet, you are unresponsible, people say, okay, bah. No? So instead to talk about hell, we try to talk about heaven. So instead to talk about, oh my God, we are doing very bad, we start to talk about, let's talk a new story about, and it's we will start to talk about jobs, we started to talk about economic growth, we started to talk about prosperity. And this new narrative was the X in which we created a new climate economy. And then, with the support of universities, think tanks, et cetera, and a lot of support, several governments, we demonstrated and make the economic case in the case of climate change. So, for other words, it's not only an environmental case. Stop that. It's also, and probably mainly, an economic case of success. And that's the way in which new climate economy was framed, we advanced, and we prospered. It was, I believe, a great success at that time.
Well, take us a little bit into the details of that, because I think that is sort of the challenge is when you're trying to push against, when you're trying to combat climate change, you're also, especially in developing economies, there's an implicit, almost pejorative element of like, well, we all need to stop growth now because there's such a large amount of emissions. But what did you find in terms of how you can balance that growth? What are some of the opportunities there?
Well, it's a long story, but basically, we were looking to change. So in order to get this win-win situation, growth and tackling climate change, we need to change three big systems. One is energy. Of course, low carbon emissions energy, which is already happening. The other, we need to switch the model for the new cities. So by the year 2050, probably we, the human being, will be like 10 billion people. Where are they going to live? So we need a new kind of cities, less polluting, more compact, more connected, more human, let me say. Cities designed not for cars, but for people. And the other is to change the landscape system consisting in rainforests, woods, agricultural purposes. Well, but if you change this model, you will find some elements that trigger economic growth. One, for instance, the new kind of infrastructure. We were estimating in that year, 2015, that between 2015 and 2030, the world will need like $90 trillion in infrastructure, either for traditional intensive fossil fuel energy or the new one, or for the old model of cities with elevated highways, etc., or massive transportation system. So if we choose we put in action the right decisions, we choose from now the new infrastructure. That new infrastructure will create growth and jobs. I'll give you one example. Solar energy in the United States. When you consider coal industry, for instance, all the way to chain, coal is generating or is having like 80,000 jobs in the States. But if you consider solar energy, solar is roughly like 265,000 new jobs created in the last decade in the States. And if you add colder like the storage, I think basically in America there are 500,000 new jobs created for the new economy. So that's the point with it. The second one is innovation. Basically, the research and research in the new elements of technology are creating new jobs and new prosperity. Actually, the element that's triggering economic growth today is technology and innovation. Not only in climate, it's very important for artificial intelligence and database, etc. Everything the new model rolls about innovation, and the regulation or the desirable regulation about that foster innovation, which is the case of Europe, for instance. Or here in America, Tesla was created not in Detroit, the city of cars, it was created in California. Why? Because the framework, the environment that is, yes, it's quite polemic and controversial, but finally, it pushed for innovation in several matters. And California is like the vanguard of the United States in innovation, and that implies economic growth. And finally, it's another element that is too long to talk, but it's like a productivity in nature, the natural capital. We always talk, or the economists talk about the productivity of capital, the productivity of labor. We need to think about the productivity of nature, which means to respect nature, to give the real value to nature elements, and that can create, and actually is happening, a new model of economic growth. That's basically the idea.
You mentioned the economic opportunity in nature, and when you were president of Mexico, you did a lot of work in setting aside lands for nature and protecting forests. And two questions in that. I mean, what was sort of the motivation? What were you trying to achieve? What motivated you to focus on that? And then two, what were some of the obstacles in trying to be proactive about creating conservation within Mexico?
That's a personal story. It's more emotional, more familiar. My father, who actually was much older than me. When I was born, he was 51 already. But he was like let me say, a very congruent man. He had ideas and values, and he put ideas and values in action, which is quite difficult those days and these days as well. I follow him in a lot of things, but he actually had quite disruptive ideas. One of them was about environment, climate. I started to plant trees following my father, and I have planted a lot. I don't want to say figures, but a lot of them. And I learned to respect nature following him. That's the main motivation, or the original one. Of course, talking about obstacles, economic interest, or, skepticism from the people. Even today is the main obstacle, no? And unfortunately, this skepticism now has been translated to political polarization. So what I want to see one day is that we humans could be talking to each other, regardless if you are conservative, liberal, whatever, Republican, Democrat. But we can talk about our common house, the planet. We can think on their common ground, and we can work together. And probably that's the main obstacle. And behind that is this idea which motivated, as I say, the creation of New Climate Economy Project, which is people believe that being responsible with the environment is costly and is damaging economic growth or profits in the companies. And it is not true if you do the right things. So I want to talk about an economic case of prosperity and development, and I believe that could be the way in which we can overcome a lot of obstacles we are facing.
Those are certainly obstacles. Another obstacle that comes to mind is, and you can speak to directly, is a lot of these environmental issues and climate in particular is such a large and such a long-term kind of challenge to tackle. When you're in elective office, you have a certain number of years that you can work on them. Tell us about sort of what that experience was like in those limitations of office. What did you find? Was there anything frustrating? Were there any things that when you're looking at the issue through the lens of sort of a limited way to have the ability to pull levers to make some changes to help address things?
But that's a point. One of the main problems of the planet is the challenges of Earth are longer than any political cycle. So one president takes office and is going to be there 4 in the case of the United States, or 8 or 6 in the case of Mexico. But let me tell you the lesson I have learned. We, the politicians, come and go. We are on temporary basis, and you need to see that by the Earth of the challenge of the Earth, the environmental problems are much longer than that. And what do you need is, one, what we are talking with this audience, we need to explain and explain and explain again what exactly is happening. Second, we need to understand that this is a global change and a global trend. We can have some setbacks, depending on who is in office or whatever. But this is a global structural change. It's not a question of 1, 2, 3, 4 years. It is happening. And I can see internet at the end of the last century, and then artificial intelligence now are very big and global changes. But also, the changes we are observing in nature and the challenge that those imply is structural, long-term change, and we need to keep working on that And we need strong domestic institutions, regulatory institutions. International framework is useful, but now it's very damaged by the way. But anyways, let me tell you other thing. Today, the issues related climate and responsibility are not driven by a federal government anymore. So they are driven today by business decisions, profit decisions, if I can say that. You know, last year, 2025, the investment in sustainable projects at global level reached $2.3 trillion. $2.3 trillion. And that was not by philanthropic purposes. It's not about charity to talk about environment. It's about businesses. It's about profits. It's about business decision. And that's it. The market is moving the wheel. So, and that will surpass local temporary policies back and forth. Sometimes it's good for the environment, other times are not. But anyway, that's temporary. But the real issues is beyond any limits of politics. Let me say that way.
Well, you're talking about these different levers that we have to address some of the changes that we're trying to affect in the planet. One is philanthropy, one is business, one is regulation and government. Let's talk about Mexico for a moment. The current administration is looking to nationalize energy, push more public ownership of energy. And what's your take on sort of where those policies are going, and how does that compare?
Those policies are going to nowhere. Mm-hmm. And they are coming from prejudice. And that's, let me say, with all respect, those fool ideas of the populism, nationalism that ruined our countries. The economic failure of Mexico is exactly those ideas about nationalism, the state-owned companies, only the government could do things. And you can see Pemex is broken. And you can see a lot of corruption. And you can see incredible things that Mexico, with such a marvelous opportunities, is failing. And it's precisely for those ideologies, populist, socialist, nationalists, that we are ruined. Now, the government continue this doctrine, let me say, that was recreated in Mexico by the former president. I cannot remember his name, last tenure. So Mexico is not doing very well. So the economic growth last year was less than 1. It's almost 0. How is that possible? Now, in this particular field, you can see some movements like the government. You know what is happening? Last year, November, the government published an auction, almost in secret, to allow some private projects in renewable energy by first time in several years, because the former government stopped all the projects. I'm talking about like a $5 billion in projects already authorized in Mexico that was completely blocked. And now the new government start to try to recover the confidence of private investors. Last week, they talk about fracking in Mexico. We can discuss about natural gas and fracking. That's another discussion. Mm-hmm. But clearly, it's a change compared with the previous government. Now, what would be my interpretation? Reality. So it's quite different to be in the opposition, blaming and saying and praying on things, ideological things, than to be in government. Once you are in government and you realize you have no money, you have no projects, and you have no electricity, and any company trying to establish its facility in Mexico realize that, oh my God, where is the supply of energy? There is not. And the government, under this idea of state-owned company, the only potential investor is the government. But if the government has no money and is running a public deficit of 5% of GDP, which is incredible, the government says, oh my God, I have no money for that. I need private sector. I have not technical people. I need people from the private sector. I need innovation from the private sector. I cannot get to have a public contradiction with my former president, but Between you and I, please invest in Mexico, please. Otherwise, we will have a terrible blackout next year, right? That's happening. What is the problem? This model of populism destroyed certainty in Mexico. So judicial branch was destroyed. As long as the Supreme Court in Mexico was independent and was opposing to the authoritarian decisions in Mexico, the government, previous president, the new president decided we will disappear the Supreme Court. And they fired all the ministers and all the magistrators and all the judges. We're talking about 20,000 people from the judicial branch. So it's a plenty, and where are being substituted by people loyal to the government. What is the problem? You are a big investor, you are planning to invest $1 billion in Mexico. One day you have a controversy with the government. Your controversy will be decided by a judge which is loyal to the government. Never that judge is going to take a decision against the government. So it's uncertainty. And people, capital needs certainty. That's the problem, and I hope the government one day could rectify that. But so reality is so hard. We need power, we need energy, we need capital, and one day the reality will knock your door. As a president, I believe so.
You said the magic word. That word uncertainty has been popping up all over this conference, and I think it's in the air, and it's something that, it's not just in Mexico, but obviously in the U.S. administration is sort of defined by uncertainty. And the other uncertain thing that's hanging over the relationship between our two countries is the pending trade deal. What's your insight into where that stands now, and how you're understanding how those two dynamics are playing out?
The trade representative of the United States went to Mexico, I believe, yesterday or 2 days ago. They are going to start negotiation next month. Formally, they will start on July the 1st. So, my God, I hope pragmatism could prevail. But the point is, we need to start, again, by the concept. Mexico and the United States need each other to be a very competitive and successful economic region. We have complementary economies. Mexico is the first customer of the United States. We love to buy American products, believe it or not, but we are the main customer of the United States. For instance, in automotive industry, if you consider all the integration in North America, one car, we can assume, is traveling or crossing the border like 7 or 8 times, no? So you build one part in the United States and then go to Mexico to build another one and then come back. Then you have an engine or you have a harness or whatever. And finally, the final product crosses the border several times. Tariffs, for instance, are destroying the gaining industry on both sides of the border, for instance. I understand, I see the point about China and practices against market in China, whatever. I believe that needs to be addressed by Mexico and fixed. I agree with that. But the point is, the main statement made this week is tariffs will prevail, and that will destroy competitiveness at regional level. And another thing, those tariffs are having, in my opinion, a real impact for consumers and citizens of the United States. America is becoming expensive. Let me say that. Groceries in the supermarket, other products are becoming expensive. Inflation is an issue. This is not good for anyone, I believe. I hope pragmatism could prevail in this negotiation, but honestly, all scenarios are open today. Like a great success in the negotiation, or even no free trade agreement anymore, which is suicide for both sides, but anyway.
Well, let's try to pivot into a little bit more optimism. You're talking about the need for investment and innovation.
A pessimistic is a realistic, very well informed, Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, we have to be realistic if we're going to actually truly address any of these things.
Let's go to the other side. Let's go up.
Well, you said the investment is needed in Mexico, is needed to help not just boost the economy and strengthen the relations in the country, but also as part of the a holistic approach of looking at climate and environmental opportunities. Where do you see the opportunities of investment in Mexico now? Maybe specifically how they relate to an economy that supports climate mitigation or an economy that protects the environment.
Being positive in my mind, actually the trade, the USMC, has such kind of rules that maybe can make that the government, Mexico government, could rectify. For instance, you have a business in Mexico, an American company, the Canadian one. Former government just destroy your business because break any certainty for the future. The rules of the trade could make the government rectify and respect private investment, and that's going to be good, especially for renewable energy. Mm-hmm. And talking about opportunities, I see, whenever you see a bottleneck in the system, there is an economic opportunity. And that's the same, by the way, in the United States and Mexico. So problems related with grid, transmission, is a bottleneck, both sides of the border. Other opportunity, talking about renewables, batteries, and storage, both sides. And could be an incredible game changer, the innovation and advances we are observing in batteries. So that will be quite important. So Mexico is a great opportunity. Others is, depending on what it could be the outcome of the renegotiation of the free trade, but this issue related with nearshoring. And to be honest, Texas is winning in the nearshoring, to be honest. Because Mexico is a victim, not about the tariff, that's another issue, but about the mistakes made by the government in terms of regulatory issues, in terms of custom offices, which is a mess, in terms of some kind of corruption, in terms of harassment coming from the tax offices and so on. I hope the Mexican government could understand that that is not usable, let alone security issues, which is becoming even worse. But let's see, Mexico has a very big chance. And of course, there are a lot of risks, but you know very well, the risks most of the time are associated to the big opportunities and big profits if you do the right way.
You chaired a UN COP conference. Obviously, the UN global framework for combating climate change was the world's approach to dealing this large, global-size, long-term issue. We've seen that process sort of stagnate. We've seen the U.S. pull out. We've seen a sort of splintering in global leadership. As someone who's worked in a lot of these global bodies that are trying to foster international cooperation, where do you see those partnerships going? Where do you see the ability to sustain some of this work?
To be honest, I believe that global institutions, including the United Nations, need to be rebuilt and not working. You know the only elevator in New York City that use an operator is United Nations building. Why?
I've been in that elevator.
Why? Because the pressure for countries to have a bureaucracy, heavy bureaucracy there, from whatever could be a country in Africa, Asia, Latin America, they want somebody working in the United Nations like a quota, which is stupid. Sorry. But those organizations need to be reformulated. But always, as a human being is, at the end, you need to understand the logic behind your counterpart. And let me tell you a tale, maybe, because I don't want to get in troubles or giving opinions about United Nations and other international institutions. But in 2009, there was the COP15 in Copenhagen. Mm-hmm. And it was a mess. No? There were like 60 leaders, presidents. President Obama was there, Putin, and a lot of people. And everybody talking beautiful things about climate, and it was a terrible, there was not agreement at all, no? Everybody voting against it, and the only agreement was that the next COP was going to be organized by Mexico in 2010. Oh my God, so I received the responsibility. Maybe the people is too young in the audience, but I remember a cartoon of the Road Runner. You remember that? Mm-hmm. Well. So I feel myself like the coyote receiving a bomb in the hands, like
Right.
oh my God, what am I going to do with this? No. So, but very quickly, I changed the scope from environmental issue to diplomatic issue. So I organized meeting in my office every week with different leaders from different parts of the world, the first video conference, by the way, at that time, and try to understand why some nations oppose to the agreement. For instance, the group 77, the G77, supposedly, this they would say the big South or the Great South, but it's developing countries, but excuse me, it's not the same African countries, sub-Saharan countries, than China. And it's not the same China or Mexico than Saudi Arabia. And all of them are inside the G77. Mm-hmm. So I started to split the problem to try to understand. The main was, for instance, China. So I went to China, an official trip, talked with President Hu Jintao. You know, this formal negotiation with Chinese people, long tables, written speeches, a mess. But after, in the lunch, eating a lot of Chinese food, by the way, plate after plate after plate, we started to talk with the president and say, Mr. President, everybody is blaming China about the failure of Copenhagen. No, he protested in Chinese, the translator there. He says something like, China is doing more than any country in favor of climate. Oh my God, sounds so weird, no? Yeah, we have the largest facility, solar power generations. We have the largest project of reforestation with this and that and that. Well, if you are doing so, Mr. President, why you didn't support the agreement? He said, because the expression that is the binding commitments, we don't want to be in an agreement, binding agreement with a superpower like the United States, imperialist countries, the Europeans or the United States, that are supervising China. We are independent, et cetera. Okay. So from my years as a lawyer or student, I remember my classes and say there are two kinds of obligations, sources of obligations. One is multilateral or bilateral, a contract we can celebrate between you and me. But there are other sources of obligation that are unilateral. Myself obligate, not donations and inheritance, whatever. I obligate myself to do something. You say, I understand you don't want to be supervised, you don't want to be a binding contract. Let's do it yourself. What if you go to Cancun and say, China offers to the world to do that and that and that? And they say, okay, yes, we can do that. And that was the beginning of NDC's nationally determined commitments. That was the key success of Paris later on. So China accepted. And with China, a lot of countries. And I went to African countries, the African Union. I allowed to address the assembly. My first time Mexican president traveled to that. I talked with all the presidents I could and say, they were so angry because they're very behind in development. They need to make a lot of sacrifices. Nobody delivered to Africa. They say that. Mm-hmm. Well, maybe you can be the winner of this deal, because I know you are suffering the most the consequences of climate change, and what you need is how to finance your action. So let's create, and we created in Cancun, a green climate fund, and actually it's operating. Mm-hmm. And the main beneficiaries of Green Climate Fund were the African countries. And I came back to Mexico with the support of the African countries. So building this kind of negotiations, trying to put in the shoes, somewhere else's shoes, try to understand their problem, their political restriction. I'm a politician as well. And finally, we got in Cancun a beautiful agreement afterwards. So it's difficult. I'm not sure it's going to work these days. Again, I believe the international framework needs a full refrain. I don't know what is going to happen with this crisis we are living today with Iran and so on. I hate those authoritarian regimes, to be honest. But it doesn't look that international law things are not working. are not working at all.
Yeah.
I believe there will be some kind of reframing, redesigning of the international order after this. Not sure, but we need it. We need it.
I mean, yeah. I mean, how can you forecast where that might go? I mean, because especially, sort of accelerated by the conflict in Iran, you have, a shifting towards potentially, the petrodollar moving off, and the establishment of BRICS and all the influence that's now moving into other sectors, and people trying to find other ways to build intellectual coalitions that are no longer dominated by the U.S. or underneath the UN framework.
We are passing from a system of rule-based order, very, very bad enforcement, whatever, but rule-based order, to some kind of no rules-based disorder, no? And these unilateral decisions for one country or another is reaching a point that is dangerous for everyone. President Trump just announced that this period of peace, is going to be elongated, and that's fine. But I believe this problem needs to reach an end very soon, because it's affecting American politics. Anyone in America, whatever could be the political preference, just charging gasoline today, understand what is the problem with the war. It's the price of gasoline, price of oil. So Strait of Hormuz or whatever, the problem, the people need to pay a lot. So I believe, I hope that peace will be reached one way or another. I pray for that. But also I believe that we cannot continue this way at international level. We need some kind of new international order, which implies we need new leadership able to build that international order. And honestly, I don't see that yet. No? But so American elections are coming in November. This situation cannot continue like that. It's affecting electoral preferences. And that's a very important argument. The other, I hope we cannot get involved forever with destructive power that is involved in religious argument, which is this Iranian regime, authoritarian one. It's quite dangerous.
Yeah.
They don't care about that they can lose all the people, but they are. So that's part of it's terrible. I don't know what is going to happen. I'm becoming very bad in forecasting what is anyway. But I like to give my opinion anyway. No?
Well, rather than forecast, let's go back to where we started. You were talking about why you were motivated to pursue certain environmental policies, and they went down to those experiences of you and your father planting trees. And I think at this event, we've had several speakers like Sylvia Earle and Val Ballard, these explorers, talking about how their personal experience of nature is what motivated them to have that hope that then sprang into that action to become those leaders that I think the world needs now. What gives you hope about the future? Where do you find that sense of us being able to persist through some of these, real large challenges?
Well, let me tell you. First, we need to be, again, a bit of reality. We are really behind the task. Honestly, I believe we lost already the goal to keep the temperature, global temperature, below 1.5 Celsius degrees. It's over. We are observing the consequences of climate change, fires in LA, the girls who died in Guadalupe River here in Texas. People don't realize, but what I keep some kind of, not only hope, but like a willingness to continue, several arguments. One is new generations. To be honest, my generation and above my generation, we were too ignorant about nature, about planet, skeptical about climate change. But I can see children, like as the new students, like the new generations, very committed with the planet, understanding what exactly is happening. And those new generations, step by step, are going to take new responsibilities in businesses or in politics even. So that's one. Second, I believe in the human being. I believe in intelligence, artificial and natural intelligence. And if we keep moving, there could be a point in which, for instance, technology could do the rest. No? And you can observe, when I was president, when I proposed the first solar facility for power generations, the price of that was $400 per megawatt hour. I said, oh my God, it looks like expensive. No, stop that. Nevertheless, I did the first aeolic farm in Mexico. But today the price is below $20 per megawatt hour, so 90% cheaper. Technology is making a change. I read some news before coming here about new kind of batteries not coming from lithium. No? And now Tesla, for instance, is getting more revenues from, or the increment in revenues is coming more. The rate of growth is more from batteries, the new kind, than for cars. Right. So technology could be in our side. Finally, last but not least, Peter, is the right thing to do. And when you act motivated for ethical reasons, when you know that it's the right thing to do, fight for the planet, try to persuade more people, understand the bad times, the time we are living, and waiting and working and pushing to good times to arrive sooner than later, it's the right thing to do. You cannot make a mistake if you are motivated by ethical reasons. So ethical reasons, technology, new generations, actually the movement is already on, no? I say last year, $2.3 trillion invested at global level, 2025 only, in this new transition of the economy. That brings hope, because it's not about, again, philanthropic issues. It's not about, please do something for the planet. It's because it's business there. Mm-hmm. And when the market starts to work, I think a lot of things could come better from the things or the situation in which we are now.
Well, Mr. President, thank you for your hope and your leadership and your time, and for joining us here today.
Thank you for inviting me. Thank you for the mariachi as well.
Appreciate you.